can you use years in cancer patients? That's what we're going to answer later today. Hey friends, welcome back to the Journal Feed. My name is Nick Zelt, and this is the only place to get spoon-fed the latest and greatest of emergency medicine. This is the podcast version of the past week summaries, which this week were written by our authors Aaron Lacey, Samuel Rouleau, Jason Lesnick, Alex Clark, and Clay Smith. Okay, let's go to the second article. Titled Ventilation Parameters During Advanced Life Support in Cardiac Arrest, a Multi-Center Observational Cohort Study out of the journal Resuscitation. Okay, so we've got a cardiac arrest, we've got an OHCA, of course we have to ventilate this person somehow. And we don't actually have that many details about what's really happening with ventilation. So we have some trials that compare the different modes of ventilation, but we don't know that well, how we're doing at the ventilation itself. How big volumes are people actually getting? We've seen trials where we vary the bag size, but that doesn't mean that all of that air actually went into the patients. And it's only been fairly recently that we've gotten nice devices to look at these ventilation parameters. We can look at how much air comes in and goes out of our patients to see how well our ventilations are doing and get some nitty-gritty numbers about what's happening. Now, just for a little bit of context, it is the expert recommendation, essentially, that the tidal volume of your patients during OHCA be about 500 to 600, and then you have an asynchronous ventilation frequency of about 10 breaths per minute. So that is really what we're aiming for. Now, from this study, looking at all the different ventilation strategies, we had a mean tidal volume of about 419 cc's. So we're a little bit low compared to our targets, and a frequency of 9.5 per minute, which is quite good. Though a peak inspiratory pressure was quite high, 41 centimeters of water. Pretty high. Now let's break it down according to the different modes of ventilation. Let's look at BVM first. This delivered pretty good tidal volumes inspiratory-wise, 490 cc's. However, the expiratory volumes were very small, on the order of 90 to 180 cc's. And so we're getting a significant amount of leak here. So you squeeze the bag, of course the bag expels air, but not all of that air is coming back up. So either we have a very poor seal during expiration, or we're losing a lot of the air that's just not going into our patients, unfortunately. So we know that BVM has a problem with mask seal, and we might be seeing that here. Now, what about supraglottic airways? Specifically, only eye gels were used in the study. This had expiratory tidal volumes of much improved, about 330 to just under 400 cc's. And unfortunately, over time, the difference between the inspiratory and expiratory volumes seemed to increase, which makes it seem like they actually get a worse leak over time. Now, this is OHCA, so this is out of a hospital. That could be due to device dislodgement. In theory, with eye gels, as they warm up in the supraglottic space, they're supposed to mold a little bit better to the tissues and get a better seal. We're not seeing that here in this data. And then finally, let's have a look at the ET tubes. Here we had quite consistent tidal volumes in the low 400 numbers, which is great, although still a little bit below our targets. The problem more with the ET tubes is that we had quite high pressures. Specifically, while we're giving continuous breaths, we had peak inspiratory pressures looking at, about 46 centimeters of water, compared to if you're doing the 30 to 2 method, then closer to just 30 centimeters of water. So with the ET tubes, we're really getting that air in, but while you're pressing on the chest, you do risk having quite high pressures. On the plus side, when we're giving asynchronous breaths, so continuous throughout the 2 minutes, they did have a minute volume which was about twice as high. So this actually tells us a lot of information about the different modes of ventilation, and it would be lovely to see more data on this kind of thing. It seems mostly like things that we already know. BVM, of course, is compromised if there's leakage. And so it's really hard to get those seals. Hopefully, if you could get them, then you'd have better numbers. But in this case, it seems like it's commonly a problem. Supraglottic devices actually work quite well, and you have pretty persistent volumes that are going in and out. Unfortunately, it seemed like there was an increase in the leak over time, but doing pretty well. And then lastly, with the T-tubes, I mean, here you're being much more consistent. You're getting pretty good volumes in and out, of course, but you risk high pressures. So in a spoonful, we are one step closer to understanding ventilation in out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Now, if we can actually measure it, then we should be able to hopefully improve it as well. And then the fifth and final article, titled Years Algorithm for the Diagnosis of Suspected Pulmonary Embolism in Patients with Cancer, a randomized clinical trial out of the JAMA. Now, the years criteria, the years algorithm, they are wonderful. I love years. It's so great. It's so nice to use. However, it has been questioned as to, whether or not it's going to work as well as we'd like in patients with a recent diagnosis of cancer. Now, if you have had cancer diagnosed within the last 6 months, then you have an 11 times higher risk of VTE. Though it's still only an absolute risk difference of 1.5%. So your risk goes way up, but overall, still not that high. But we still question whether or not it's going to work very well in cancer patients. Now, cancer was not an exclusion criteria in the original derivation of the years algorithm, so hypothetically, yeah, it does work. But we still like to subgroup these things, have a look, and see, does it truly work when we have a much higher pretest probability for these patients given. So this was an RCT done in 21 European hospitals where patients were randomized. I really like this. This was great. Between a years algorithm approach where they would do years, they would get a dimer. If they don't have the years criteria, then that dimer threshold goes up to 1,000. If they do have years criteria, then the dimer threshold stays at 50. Typically, you could still age adjust that, but they didn't go there in this study, or they were randomized to just, boom, get a CTPA. This is a lovely study, and I wish more diagnostic algorithms had this kind of approach because, it's a very interesting approach. It's nice to see. And the primary outcome was objectively proven and symptomatic VTE or possible PE-related death within 60 days. They randomized 282 patients to the years algorithm and 273 patients to just, boom, get a CTPA. Now, the major thing that makes you squint a little bit at this data is that in the years group, the primary outcome occurred in just 5 patients. It's just under 2%. However, in the CTPA group, the primary outcome occurred in 15 patients, 5.5%. So there's a 3-fold higher incidence of VTEs in the CTPA group. All the same, the years algorithm was found to be non-inferior to CTPA, which I really like. Absolute risk difference of 3.7, which was significant though. It did 22% less scans with years in proportion to just getting a CTPA for everybody. And this is a really good use of non-inferior because it can't be superior because the test comes down to the same thing if the years algorithm is positive. Though there is the possibility that since we saw much higher rates in the CTPA group that we're getting some false positives on that end, which we know is a risk if you're doing CTPAs in patients who are theoretically otherwise low risk. If you have a positive dimer, typically, if you get a CTPA, then you have a higher chance of having a false positive than a false negative on the dimer. All the same, though, using the years algorithm here in patients which we know have cancer seem to be non-inferior to just getting a CTPA. And so I think for the most part, given that the original validation studies would have still included patients who potentially have cancer or do have cancer, and here you've got, again, sort of validation for this, I'd say it's very reasonable. So to even in a patient who you know has cancer to go for this approach. Though there are still many other approaches to working with your PE patients. But if you want to add in the years algorithm for you, then I think that's quite reasonable. It would, however, be nice to see this repeated in a North American population, and hopefully they would repeat the study design as well. I think it was nice. So in a spoonful, years is safe and just as good as just getting a CTPA up front. And that's nice to see and validated now in cancer patients. Now, if you are hearing this right now, then you are not a part of the members feed, and so you missed 3 articles from this past week. What were those articles about? Well, what are the outcomes of patients who actually get awake intubations? And then we talked about doing direct oral challenges for penicillin and whether or not this is helping our patients. And then finally, we had a trial about lidocaine versus amiodarone in patients with refractory shock and out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Links to all the original articles can be found at journalfeed.org or just follow the links in your show notes. Our goal here is for you to keep up the easy way through spoon feeding. Thank you.